ThatGreatBusinessShow.com is brought to you by De Facto Shaving Oil, the best anyone can get. Made in Ireland, sold worldwide.
Welcome to episode 67 of That Great Business Show, posting on December the 24th, 2021. I'm Conal O'Moran, and on this episode of what our listeners like to call Ireland's best business podcast, we have a mixologist, and that's a fancy word for a cocktail maker, but one who also double jobs as probably Ireland's best-known venture capitalist. Brian Caulfield is venture partner at Molten Ventures, a quoted company that many of you will have known previously as Draper Esprit. Brian has a very, very impressive list of investment wins under his belt, and he has an equally long list of business issues that he feels very strongly about, and that is what I'm hoping to spend the next hour or so talking to Brian about. So welcome to That Great Business Show, Brian Caulfield.
Thank you, Conal.
And let me start by asking you, what is your favourite cocktail?
You can't beat a Manhattan. I think that's the one that I go back to personally on a regular basis, you know.
And why do I reference you and cocktails?
Because during lockdown, in the initial lockdown in particular, I suppose like a lot of people, I found it quite tough going. And I'd get up on a Monday morning and think to myself, I just want to get through the week, you know. And then I'd get to Friday and realise that Saturday was going to be exactly the same as Monday. And it became a way of kind of putting some punctuation into the week. So, you know, Friday about 6 o'clock, I would make a cocktail. And that kind of was a sort of a break point. It kind of, as I said, it put some punctuation into the week during lockdown.
And the world was able to share it because you were posting it on Twitter. You still post it on Fridays on Twitter.
I do. I wouldn't say I do one every Friday now, although we may be back to the times when I'll need to do that. But I wouldn't say I do it every Friday. But if it's been a long week, then definitely that's a great excuse to kind of to look up a new recipe. The other thing I've really enjoyed about it is there's an incredible range of Irish craft spirits available now. So,
what's your favourite?
Well, I love what the guys in Still Garden are doing, where they're using kind of locally forged botanicals to make gin, and they have a distillery that you can actually visit and create your own gin. And I think that's an absolutely fantastic concept. God help them, they kind of launched just as the pandemic hit. So I'd say there aren't too many people who've had the experience of making their personalised gin just yet. But I think it's a phenomenal idea. And I mean, there are even a couple of people out there making Irish bitters. So, you know, I've really enjoyed that kind of experimenting with different Irish ingredients.
And we have loved having some of them onto That Great Business Show. We've had, now, I'm going to forget some of them, but certainly Natterjack Whiskey. We've had Coole Swan, obviously Mary Sadler is. Yes. Wow. We've had Glendalough, the lady who does the botanicals there. One company, and I wonder, do you know of their gin, Dúlamán, up in Donegal?
I don't.
Well, may I suggest to you, Brian Caulfield, when you leave here, go down to O'Brien's or wherever, and it is outstanding. Now, we're not here to talk about gin. We're here to talk about Brian Caulfield and what makes him tick. Not thick, tick, because you ain't thick, because you have had so many successes. How do you find those successful companies that you have guided, headed, invested in?
So, I mean, I think the first thing is, you know, I suppose fundamentally the willingness to take chances. You know, whenever you're looking at an investment, you can always find reasons not to make an investment. You can always find risks. You can always find problems and challenges. So a lot of it is just about, you know, being an optimist and thinking about what could go right here. And if it went right, you know, how great would that be, kind of thing.
And being great, is that a great financial outturn, or great that you have created a new software or new technology, or?
Well, it's interesting. I think most entrepreneurs and founders aren't actually all that focused on money. A lot of the time, they're, I often say that most entrepreneurs are grumpy people, and they see something being done badly and say, I cannot believe that is so shit, There has to be a better way to do that. And a big part of the motivation is the solving of the problem, the fixing of this thing that's just being done so badly. And generally speaking, if you're in a kind of, if you like, a large enough market opportunity, if the opportunity space is large enough and you do a good job of fixing that problem, then the kind of the financial rewards follow. I think for me personally, it's a combination of the two. I'm actually involved in a lot of kind of non-profit companies, social enterprises like ChangeXHe, who are essentially creating a technology platform to spread good social innovations and allow people in communities to find a social innovation that they can deploy in their own community. And, it's a tech business.
I had John Teeling sitting in that very chair probably 8 months ago or thereabouts. And he is singular in his view on this, doesn't believe in social enterprise, I think.
That is interesting, and it also surprises me because John is a guy who is what would you say, both a catalyst but also a hero to an awful lot of Irish entrepreneurs, an incredibly engaging guy. We'd be having a lot of laughs now if he was sitting here.
Maybe that's a good idea. I'll get the two of you in for a chat. Because
Yes.
I'll always welcome John. He's so, as you say, he's great fun. I think his episode's something like 24 or 28, if anybody wants to go back and listen to him.
I'd recommend it.
Oh, yeah.
He's always
making diamonds, making whiskey, making women's underwear, finding gold, etc., etc. It goes on.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story. I mean, I know, for example, that he was a huge inspiration for Colm Lyon, the founder of Real X Payments and now Fire. And I mean, my sense of John was that he would certainly have been a man who cared about social progress. I
think he does, but I think his model for business is very simple. It has to be for profit, and that just gets the best out of what you do with the profit is a different issue. You see?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
well, an awful lot of social enterprises can have a for-profit model, and I think increasingly a lot of social enterprises, a key thing for them is to be able to have a sustainable model so that they're not reliant on philanthropy in the long term. And the really, really successful social enterprises, that's exactly what they do. They find a revenue model for what they're doing. And certainly in ChangeXHe, that's a key focus for the business, to have a long-term sustainable revenue model, so that you can pay your people properly and all of that good stuff. But at the same time, you're spreading great ideas that can be deployed in communities and make a difference in people's lives.
And did that side of your character come to the fore? I mentioned that you are hugely successful. Did that give you the, let's call it something nice, the bandwidth to be able to, spread the love a bit more?
Perhaps. I mean, I think the other thing that's probably a big factor is that, for example, both my parents grew up in council houses, and when I was 12, both my parents went to college. Now, I wouldn't pretend for a second that I had a poor upbringing or anything like that, because both my parents had done really very, very, very well. But nonetheless, I'm sort of certainly not somebody who's come from a moneyed family or anything like that. And I think that does give you a different perspective on wealth, and I think it gives you a different perspective on people, actually, you know. So I think that's probably part of it as well.
People ask me, what questions am I going to ask? And I answer them by saying, I have no idea. It depends on what the interviewee says. I haven't prepared you for any of this, but particularly I'm going to ask you now about your views on wealth. What do you care about wealth?
Not hugely. I actually consider myself tremendously lucky. A good friend of mine who, if I'm lucky, I might meet for a pint over Christmas. But a good friend said to me many years ago, he said, Brian, you're very good at making money, but you're fuck all good at spending it, if you'll excuse the profanity. But I've never had a burning desire to have multiple homes. I don't own a boat. I have one home, which it's a nice home, but you know, I don't.
That's the Warren Buffett school, isn't it? He lives in the same house for the last X numbers of years. I mean, decades and decades, or probably in his case now, it's almost centuries and centuries.
Close enough. Yeah.
There's a lovely quote that I found about you that I think probably says something about you and your attitudes indirectly to what we're talking about. I think the big lesson from that is that you are not invincible. Sometimes entrepreneurs who are successful, especially in their first business, think they have a template for success. The reality is that there is a lot of luck in success.
Yes. Yeah. So I absolutely believe that there were people who were every bit as smart as I was and every bit as hardworking and, you know, every bit as focused and dedicated to, to achieving something. But you get a bad break here and there, and it can all come tumbling down very, very easily. I mean, even in my own case, I often tell the story of, you know, in late 1999, we were scheduled to merge with an American company called Palinx, and Lehman Brothers were going to take us public on NASDAQ in May of 2000. Lehman Brothers themselves are no longer with us. But, you know, sadly, what actually happened was in March of 2000, we had the first big blip in the NASDAQ stock market. It became very clear that nobody was going to be going public anytime soon, you know. And our merger partner, Palinx, they got nervous. They sold themselves to a company called CyberSource. We ended up being acquired by Trintech, who were already a public company. That could very easily have gone horribly wrong, you know. I mean, one of the reasons that we did get acquired by Trintech was because the alternative was that we needed to raise more funding, and it was an incredibly difficult time to raise funding. So, you know, that could have been the end of the road for us, you know.
What was it like those weeks or months?
It was pretty tough. It was pretty tough for a number of different reasons. And I think, you know, one of the most important qualities for an entrepreneur is resilience and the ability to kind of keep going under that kind of pressure, you know. I mean, we literally went from a situation where I'd been to Sand Hill Road looking to raise money. And
for those who don't know, it is in San Francisco. This was the centre of VC back in those days. It's kind of moved a little bit out from there now, but still is a huge centre for funding. Yeah?
It is indeed. A lot of the big VCs have moved into the city now, whereas Sand Hill Road is kind of out near Stanford, kind of on the periphery a little bit. But yes, I went to Sand Hill Road. I remember so well a meeting with one investor where we were saying, you know, we want to raise $8 million. And he said to me, you know, Brian, you know, you just don't get it. You know, you should raise at least 20 million and you should spend it in 9 months. And there was no clarity about what we should spend the money on. There was no sense of there being any benchmarks that we should be achieving with this money. It was just kind of go spend it, you know. And we went from that scenario to a kind of a nuclear winter from a fundraising perspective, literally in the space of a few months, you know. I mean, I think one of the things that I certainly found hardest at that stage, we probably had 80 employees, that kind of ballpark. I felt a huge sense of responsibility to those people and, you know, to I suppose at the very least give them a soft landing kind of thing in what was a very, very difficult time for the tech industry, you know.
How do you choose your winners?
To me, the first thing is always the market opportunity. Am I excited about the market opportunity?
And what kind of research would you do into that? Do you have books and books and books, or online? Checking out size.
So
countries?
I'd say it's a couple of different things. I mean, the first thing is, certainly you'll research what analysts are saying about the size of the market, and you'll do that online. You'll talk to other people that you respect in the market and in the industry and get their take. But sometimes you have to be prepared to kind of take a leap of faith, you know, and probably one of the best examples of that was Movidius. The founders of Movidius had established the company, I'm going to say around 2003. I might be out by a year or two.
They were making chips, if I remember, wasn't that right?
That's right. It was chips that were specifically intended to allow you to put computer vision capabilities into battery-powered devices at the edge of the network. So, you know, mobile phones and so on. And because of that, they needed to be extremely small chips, physically, ideally, but also incredibly low power consumption. So that was the big kind of technical challenge that the guys were working with. The first big money spinner, the first big revenue generating application for Movidius was consumer drones for visual collision avoidance and GPS denied hovering. I absolutely guarantee you that when they started the company, that never crossed their mind. They would never have given anyone a pitch who saying, this is going to be in consumer drones in kind of 10, 11 years' time, you know. But what they did understand was that there would be a need and a desire for computer vision capabilities at the edge of the network, you know. And I think I pitched that to my partners 3 times. I think the third time there was a deathly silence. And I was lucky because there was a partner from another venture capital firm who happened to be in the room with us that day who said, you know, Brian, that's really interesting, you know. And that was, you know, the trigger, if you like, that enabled me to get that deal past my partners.
You know what they say about the prophet in his own land, isn't that it?
Yes, yeah. I think when you pitch a deal for the third time, though, people are starting to wonder, you know.
So, actually, what happened to Movidius in the end?
Movidius was acquired by Intel for a figure that I'm not at liberty to disclose, but
it was
rumoured to be in the order of 400 million.
Happy days. And
yeah.
I hope you had a toenail interest in that one, did you?
So in a personal capacity, no, but as an investment firm, it was...
That was within Draper Esprit.
That was within Draper Esprit, and it was a hugely important deal for us. I mean, apart from, you know, being a big win financially, it was the first big exit we'd had after we went public. We went public in June 2016. And I think we signed and announced the deal for the sale of Movidius to Intel in September.
Had it been on the back burner, though?
Not in terms of the exit. The company had been progressing really, really well, and after many years without revenue, had kind of gone 1 million, 10 million, 40 million, or they're on track for 40 million. And so we didn't have the exit, if you like, lined up. But the company was doing well and was obviously going to be an acquisition target. But for us to be able to, I suppose, prove the model to the public markets by delivering a really, really strong exit within a few months of going public was obviously enormously helpful, and kind of demonstrated that we could do what we said we could do,
Fantastic. Listen, I'm going to take a quick break, and I want to come back and ask you about some of the other great wins that you've had. Let's just take a quick ad break.
Thinking of travel? If so, make sure to make De Facto, the world's best shaving oil, your choice of travel companion. A 25 millilitre bottle of De Facto means no hassle at airports, no bulky cans to carry, and the guarantee of the world's best shave. DeFactoShave.com.
Everyday accounting can be a bit of a drama for SMEs. However, BigRedCloud.com takes the drama away with its simple and easy to use cloud-based accounting and payroll software designed for SME owners. Raise and send invoices, manage VAT reports and obligations, run management reports, link directly to Irish banks, automatically import purchase invoices, and so much more. All with 5-star customer support. BigRedCloud.com, 100% Irish owned and a proud member of TeamGBS.
That great business show.
I'm here with Brian Caulfield, of venture partner with Draper Esprit. Why did you change the name to Molten Ventures?
I suppose a couple of different things. I mean, firstly, I should say that I'm not involved in the day-to-day anymore.
Is that why you're called venture partner?
Yeah, venture partner is one of these great flexible titles. It sort of says you're kind of semi-detached from the firm. So I'm not involved day-to-day, so I wasn't a participant in the discussions. But I think there's a couple of things. I mean, firstly, the firm had been associated for a long time with the Draper Fisher Jurvetson firm in California. That connection, I suppose, was getting weaker and weaker in many respects, and probably caused confusion in the market. What exactly is the relationship with Tim Draper? Is Tim running the firm? Those kind of things. But I think also we had kind of repositioned the firm in a fairly material way. We'd gone, I think when we IPO'd, the market cap was something like 120 million sterling. The market cap today, a ballpark 1.5 billion.
That is not bad.
That's not bad. And it in venture capital, that tends to change a little bit what you do.
Bigger ticket investments, is that it? Or?
Bigger ticket investments. In the case of Molten Ventures, we'd also established a fund of funds practice, if you like. So we'd become very active investors in seed funds. So that was a kind of a completely new activity. So the firm itself had changed.
And molten presumably means red hot.
It means red hot, but it's also about kind of changes in the state of matter, and I think the best VC firms are really focused on opportunities that can drive change, and that can have an impact beyond just, more money.
So whet my appetite further and tell me about some of the other big wins that you just did not expect, because that does happen, doesn't it?
It does happen. I suppose when you go into an investment, you're always thinking that it can be successful, you know, if you
went in not hoping that you'd be something deeply wrong with you.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes I think what tends to change a lot is the timeline. You know, you have the companies that take much longer to kind of to prove their point, if you like, or to demonstrate their model. And you have some companies that you expect you'll be an investor in for a long time. And, you know, then suddenly inside 2 years, the company is exiting, you know. I mean, a good example of that just over the past few months is Robotify, an amazing company started by two, you know, I shouldn't call them kids, but like, they're kids, you know. I think when I met the two founders, Evan and Adam, initially they were 21. They'd already been working on the business for a while, and that business was sold just recently.
What does that do?
So essentially what they do is they have a browser-based technology that allows you to teach kids to code using simulated robots. So it's a really, really engaging way for kids to learn to code.
Is this how you spent your Saturday afternoons, playing with that? Is that it?
Well,
you should have been cutting the grass, you know.
Sadly, in the days when I was learning to code, there wasn't even any internet, Connell. So
because I should have said at the very beginning, you came in at Trinity, didn't it? Was that it, where you studied tech? Wasn't that it?
Yeah. So originally I'm a computer engineer, but interestingly, like, computers would have been in our house way prior to that.
How come?
My dad was the finance director of John Hind, the postcard company, but he always he hated being an accountant, to the extent that, you know, when I was 16, 17 doing my leaving cert and my friends were coming to the house, my dad would be warning them off accountancy as a profession. So he wasn't particularly fond of accounting as a profession, but he started to tinker with computers and started writing software himself. So,
get away. Wow, that's pretty out there, isn't it?
Well, it certainly was in the kind of late 70s and early 80s. So, you know, we would have had ZX Spectrums and Sinclair QLs and Apple IIes and so on.
Anybody who, young people listening to this podcast who want to know all about those, look in the museum.
Yes.
They're very large, not very powerful.
Not widely available anymore, shall we say.
So that was the beginning. So, sorry, I interrupt because I need to know your other big wins and ones that just out of the blue. You were talking about their Robotify.
So Robotify was just obviously very, very recently, and one of those situations where you kind of thought, on the one hand, I'm really gutted because we've kind of sold this company too early. It could have been much, much bigger. It was a good investment return for everybody involved.
So talk to me about that, because obviously one falls in love with one's investment sometimes.
Yes.
Clearly you love that one. Would you have thought about holding on longer, or who pushes the sale?
I think in practically every situation that I've been involved in, if the founders feel that the time is right to sell the company, you would be a very, very foolish investor to go against them. And equally, I don't think founders realise how difficult it is for investors to sell a company if they don't want to sell. So I think when it gets down to the kind of serious conversations about the decision to sell a company, it's the founders and the management team that are really the decision makers, and that tend to drive the process, actually.
But is it not true that one of the models is that you get your founders, they build it to whatever, 10 million, 20 million turnover, something like that. And then the professional managers are pushed in and the founders are pushed out.
I don't think it's necessarily the case that the founders are pushed out, but what I do think is frequently the case is that people who are really, really good at starting something and getting something going tend not to be great managers of large numbers of people, you know? And I think the really incredibly strong entrepreneurs are actually the ones who recognize that and who recognize the value of professional management and, you know, start to build a team around themselves of professional managers who, you know, who know how to run big teams, you know?
Perfect segue into items or issues that get Brian Caulfield hot under the collar. Explain the problem and explain the solution to me about share options in Ireland. Big problem.
The fundamental problem is that share options in Ireland, certainly in early stage tech companies, almost always end up being taxed at full income tax rates.
When you get them.
When you get them. And one of the reasons that they're not more widely used is because of the fact that they that they do end up being taxed at full income tax. And
so talk me through an actual example of that. So, you know, companies valued at a notional, because it can only be a notional, say million.
Yes. So the company is valued notionally at, do you mean on exit? Or?
No. I mean, when they are vested, when the people, the only way that you can beat the Googles and the Facebooks for really top-class employees is to entice them with cash that you don't have or shares because they think that they're going to be the next Mark Zuckerbergs, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, to give you, let's say, an international comparison, in the UK, it's possible for members of a senior management team to have their share options taxed at 10%, right, under the EMS scheme there. And, you know, I'll tell you how bad it can get here. In one of the companies that I was involved in as an investor, we'd identified a really, really strong product manager in the US. And product management is one of the skill sets that's probably in shortest supply, certainly in Ireland. He actually wanted to come and live in Europe for a few years with his wife. So that was just, you know, perfect. The question arose of whether he would move to London or to Dublin, and a big part of the decision for him was around the taxation of share options on an exit of the company. So he moved to London rather than to Dublin, and that in itself is obviously not a good thing. But worse still, we actually moved engineers from Dublin to London to build a team around him in London, you know.
And one of the issues that he would have faced is he gets his share options, he's taxed on it, and he has to find the cash to pay, even though isn't it a nuts situation? That's
if he exercises them. If he exercises his share options, then he immediately faces an income tax bill on the difference between the value and the exercise price, right? And that's why people don't exercise, and that's exactly why they end up paying full income tax. But you're absolutely right. You're effectively being taxed on money that you didn't get and might never get. You know, it's completely wrong.
And it is one of the very few methods of, as you were saying, they're enticing people, top people. It's like as if we have a barrier to having the best sports people joining teams here. It's just not right. And now, explain to me why or what does Brian Caulfield put this down to? Who is behind such a silly scheme?
So I think there's a couple of different things. I mean, I think we've made great progress in Ireland in terms of the perception of entrepreneurs. I mean, there was very much a time in Ireland when, if you entrepreneur was effectively equivalent to chancer by definition in the minds of an awful lot of Irish people. And, the assumption was if you were an entrepreneur that you were going home every Friday with your pocket stuffed with fivers, the tax had not been paid on, As I often said to people, like in my own first business, my customers were AIB and Barclays and people like that, and they just refused to pay me in cash, no matter how often I asked. So I think that is a little bit of the kind of the root of the problem. I think we've moved forward a bit, but there is still a little bit of an attitude of, we now love our entrepreneurs so long as they don't actually make any money,
And does that come out of a department? I want you to name something. Find me a bogeyman, please.
Well, I'm reluctant to do that because
small town, I know, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's
so
silly.
It is silly, and it is hugely frustrating to me that even after all the work that we've done through Scale Ireland and so on, that we haven't managed to make more progress in fixing this problem.
Now, the Irish Brochure Association has been banging on about that forever,
for years, and I think most people do actually believe that employee participation in the ownership of companies is a good thing, But I think there's also, particularly within the Department of Finance,
good, you've named the name, good.
Well, there is a deep conservatism there. And
they're bloody socialists, and the irony is that socialism should mean that you own the company that you work for.
Well,
that's the way to do it.
I do think there's a huge contradiction there, and I think it's ironic that, for example, in Aircom, the unions were able to cut a tremendous deal.
15% they had, if you remember.
Yeah, for share options in Aircom. But we've never managed to get anything close to that kind of deal for employees in early stage tech companies who are actually taking enormously more risk than the employees of Aircom, So there is a kind of an irony there for sure. But I think Irish government is very incrementalist in its approach, and I think over the past years we've been inching forward, but the approach tends to be very much of one of, let's do something small, see how it goes for a couple of years, come back and look at it again. There's very little radicalism in Irish either politics or
except when it comes to something like the SIA accounts, because they were vote getters. Isn't that right?
That's true, and the reality is that I don't think most Irish people know enough about the contribution of kind of tech startups to the economy, and certainly very few TDs really know much about that. And definitely one of the jobs for Scale Ireland is to kind of articulate that much more clearly.
And we should explain, you chair Scale Ireland.
I chair Scale Ireland, which is a relatively new organisation that effectively advocates for early stage and scale up technology businesses.
Brian, can I hold you there, because we have to earn a living and I have to go for a quick ad break, and I want to come back and ask you about Brian Caulfield's view about LinkedIn and communicating with Brian through LinkedIn.
Viscosity. When you shave, you want the highest viscosity because it helps the blade run smoother. De facto, the world's best shaving oil, has incredible viscosity. That's why De facto leaves your face, underarms, or legs nick-free. Higher viscosity makes blades last longer. De facto is the best for your skin and your pocket. DeFactoShave.com.
Everyday accounting can be a bit of a drama for SMEs. However, BigRedCloud.com takes the drama away with its simple and easy to use cloud-based accounting and payroll software designed for SME owners. Raise and send invoices, manage VAT reports and obligations, run management reports, link directly to Irish banks, automatically import purchase invoices, and so much more. All with 5-star customer support. BigRedCloud.com, 100% Irish owned and a proud member of TeamGBS.
Subscribe today to That Great Business Show on your favourite podcast platform, including Apple and Spotify.
I'm here with Brian Caulfield, who is venture partner with Molten Ventures. He is very clear he's not full-time with them because he's so busy with so many other things. But one of the things is he gives a lot of very, very good advice. I've spoken with a lot of people about Brian before having this interview, and the words candid, forthright and honest would be some of the words used that I remember about you give really good advice. One of the things, though, you give advice about is if somebody tries to contact you on LinkedIn, you have it written in capital letters. What do you tell them about talking to Brian on LinkedIn?
I tell them not to contact me through LinkedIn messaging. If they're connected to me on LinkedIn, all they have to do is look at the contact details, and my email is there so that they can email me directly. And I suppose, why do I do that? Two things. I mean, firstly, the LinkedIn messaging experience is just absolutely horrific.
It's a dog's dinner.
It is dreadful.
And remind me again, LinkedIn is owned by?
LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft.
And Microsoft makes email business, as far as I remember, yeah.
Microsoft and LinkedIn, they should have bought one of my other portfolio companies, DataHug, many years ago. And DataHug, it was acquired, but What LinkedIn ought to have done is bought DataHug and used it to provide a linkage to email that would have been incredibly compelling. But they missed the opportunity many years ago and still haven't fixed that. And it's amazing.
And call me naive, but if Microsoft has all the engineers in the entire universe at its beck and call, you'd say, John or Mary, come here, fix that. Wouldn't it be that simple?
Yes. I suppose the issue with any organisation is that there's always kind of a list of priorities. And for most large organisations in particular, because they're so inflexible, there can only be 2 or 3 priorities at any one moment in time, you know. And there is a global shortage of engineering talent that impacts on the big companies as well as the small ones.
And it is a massive shortage.
Yeah.
And how could Ireland deal with that, leaving aside all the issues around share options? What else can we do?
So the first thing that we need to do is, fix education so that...
What would you do?
Well, firstly, I do a lot more to encourage women into science and technology subjects. I think we've made a little bit of progress, but I mean, when I think of my first year in college in engineering in Trinity, there were 16 women in a class of almost 180. That's just absolutely shocking. Now, I think we have made progress from that perspective, but we've ways to go. I think we need way, way better, if you like, technology education for small kids. I mean, digital skills are no longer optional. It's not. It's a little bit like basic arithmetic. It's that fundamental for kids at an early stage to be learning digital skills.
Now, if you are going to teach digital skills, that means the teachers have to have digital skills. So it's a bit of a circular argument, that, isn't it? in a bad way.
It is, and I think teachers will tell you themselves that for the most part they don't have the digital skills themselves. But think about the company I was talking about earlier on, Robotify, which is a platform to enable kids to learn to code through play, if you like. And there are lots of other companies, trying to tackle that problem with technology platforms that don't just educate the kids, but also educate the teachers, So I think there's a lot of potential there. I mean, I saw one recently, Olus Education, that has a platform to do exactly that, focus on teaching kids digital skills, but at the same time educate their teachers as well. So there's a lot that we can do with tech, but you also have to change mindsets as well. People need to realize how fundamental the digital skills are. That all addresses the pipeline, but that's longer term. It takes time for those kids to come through the education system. The other things that we should be doing is really, really focusing on making Ireland a tremendous place to live and work, because that is what's going to attract foreign talent. And, from that perspective, we obviously need to fix our housing problem in particular. I think outside of that issue, we actually have a pretty good product, if you like, from the perspective of talented people from other parts of the world. I think Ireland, leaving aside the housing crisis, is actually a pretty good place to live and work,
So the weather, but anyway, that's a different story. Actually, one of the things that COVID may have taught us, though, is do people have to live here? Like, it's, in one way, it's concerning for me. I love the idea of everybody coming into this country, but they no longer really have to come here if you're working in tech.
Yeah.
So there's a decentralization happening.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's a trend that Ireland needs to be very, very concerned about.
What can they do about it? What can we do about it?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, the first thing is that as things stand at the moment, the choice that we've made is low corporate taxes and high personal taxes. I mean, I think that's actually going to be problematic into the future, especially as countries like Portugal and Spain make it very, very attractive to people to locate there from a personal taxation perspective. So I think that's something that's going to be a challenge from a government perspective. I think what we're seeing is a shift in the basis of international tax competition, where corporate taxes become much less of a competitive driver. To be honest, pretty soon everybody's going to be at 15% there or thereabouts. That's kind of the direction of travel. And the thing that will differentiate countries outside of that is going to be, quality of public services and so on will matter, but also the personal taxation regime.
But you hear the contradiction that you're actually articulating there. Lower taxes means fewer services, not better services.
Yeah. Well, it does, but not automatically. Personally, I think there's an enormous amount that we could do in Ireland to improve the efficiency of the delivery of public services, and I mean, if you look at our health service, the reality is that we don't underspend on our health service. We just don't do a tremendous job of managing that spend. I think that's the reality. I think we spend more than the Dutch, for example, even on a population age-adjusted basis, So I think there's a lot that we could do to improve the efficiency of spending in a lot of our public services. That doesn't mean that there aren't services, by the way, that we should spend more on. you know.
We're going to run out of time, and I have to find out some of the hot tips within your stable. What companies would you like to highlight to say, keep an eye on X or Y? And I know you're going to tell me you love all your children equally, but the children sometimes can be just at the right time to shine.
Yeah, well, I think a really great example of that is a company called Boundless, which is essentially a platform to allow you to employ anyone, anywhere. So it's exactly on theme with what we were just talking about. So effectively what it allows you to do is, in a fully compliant way, you know, hire somebody in Romania or Bulgaria or Spain or Portugal or wherever it might be. And I think that's going to be a huge market opportunity.
And are you an advisor to them, or is that within Molten?
No, that's a personal investment, a personal angel investment. I was, I think, one of the very first seed investors in Boundless. And
you better give them a shout out if you can remember their names, can you?
How do you mean the founders, D. Coakley and Emily Castles, two fantastic founders.
D. Coakley, I think I may know her. Yeah.
Yeah, could well do. Yeah. D has been around the Irish tech scene for a while.
We'll have to have them in. Who else would you? What other companies? Any other companies you'd go for?
The other one would be Moby Bikes.
Oh, yeah.
So Moby Bikes, as a lot of people would know, has a license for a street e-bike sharing scheme, and everybody knows the bikes because they're kind of bright lime yellow in colour. But we've also, in the past year or so, developed a very, very strong business, essentially providing e-bikes as a service to food and 10-minute grocery delivery businesses, not just in Ireland, but in the UK and shortly in the Netherlands and in the US as well. So that business is accelerating dramatically now.
I love businesses. The way we, I hope, look at business, no boundaries, no borders.
Yes.
And that is a fundamental change, because what you were talking about back then, when there was no business in Ireland, it was all about, oh God, we can't get off this island. It's so easy now. Well, I wouldn't say easy, but it's doable.
Well, you kind of don't have a choice if you want to scale a business. The only material businesses in Ireland that are not exporting are the kind of utilities and the banks, and that's about it. Everybody
they're
else
disappearing as well.
They are, yeah. They're increasingly threatened, shall we say.
Come here to me. Hire in a heartbeat. Who would you hire in a heartbeat?
So I have to be very careful. So wisdom dictates that I don't mention anyone that I'm actually working with at the moment.
But they're all brilliant, and you'd hire them all, of course.
I absolutely would. But, in terms of people that I've worked with previously, a guy that worked with me in my first business, Gary Ramsey, phenomenal guy. Liz McCarthy, who was, if you like, my co-founder in Scale Ireland, incredible person to work with. But if I had to pick just one as the kind of the guy that I'd really like to hire, I'm going to forget the name now. That's embarrassing.
No,
this is
I forget things as well. And my phone goes off. And
the penalty, I've remembered now. It's a gentleman called Fergus Gloster.
That's a nice name, Fergus Gloster.
Yeah.
Was he the Duke of Gloucester's brother or anything? No,
he wasn't. But what he was the guy who built European sales for Salesforce. And then subsequently for Marketo. Very understated guy, but did an absolutely incredible job for both of those companies. And if I was kind of running an enterprise SaaS business right now, that's exactly the guy that I would want to drive sales for the business.
And is he
really
living off in
scale.
San Francisco or somewhere fancy like that, or no?
No. Fergus is. I think I've been accusing him of being a Cork man for years, but I'm told he's actually from Limerick, and I think he lives in Dublin these days. But very, I would say, a home bird in that respect.
Well, that's some CV. Fergus Gloster, you're hired, but also if you want to come in and talk to us about how you drive those kind of sales, I'd love to hear and have you on what people call Ireland's best business podcast. And that is it from That Great Business Show. Brian, thank you so much for joining us on That Great Business Show, episode 67. And my thanks to all the team here at the Dublin Podcast Studios. Most importantly, today's sound engineer, Peter Rice, who every week makes sure we are the world's best sounding podcast. And do please share this podcast with anyone who loves business. And also do subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. That makes sure that Ireland's best business podcast is always close by. And we are here to help businesses just like yours. So if there are issues or topics you would like us to cover, do contact us using Brian's favourite LinkedIn, where we have our dedicated LinkedIn page. And I think we're up over the 1,200 mark now of people who are following us. And you can chat to us there directly. And if you're planning an ad campaign, we would love to help. Join companies like Big Red Cloud and organisations like ISME and Údarás na Gaeltachta, who recognise it's a great way to talk to Ireland's SMEs. Contact us at www.thatgreatbusinessshow.com. I'm laughing when I use Brian, the www. That's gone now, is it? Nobody ever bothers.
Nobody types that anymore.
No. And if they did, a bit like you on LinkedIn, they'd say, get lost. Because you're also, you are big on autofill. Isn't that another one of your bugbears?
Yeah, I became converted in recent years to using a password keeper so that I'd have highly secure passwords across all of the different, services and websites that I use. And now I discover that there are some where, you can't fill from the password keeper, and it drives me nuts.
But that's on a long list of things.
It's on a long list, yeah.
And as always, the great business insights that you just got there from Brian Caulfield and that you hear every week on That Great Business Show are only made possible thanks to our sponsor, the great makers of the world's best shaving oil, de facto made in Mayo, sold worldwide. Our thanks again to them. So from me, Conal Moran, until the next time, Slán Tamil.